You know, it seems everywhere I turn these days, people have question marks above their heads, kind of like in a comic book. That's why we bring in CEO Joe Calhoun. So, Steve Brennan, what's the question for Joe today?
Yeah, a question for Joe today is, are we in a recession? Which seems like a simple question, but I suspect it's not so simple, Joe.
Yeah, first of all, I just hope I don't add any more question marks. But yeah, look, I wrote about this week. There was a poll in the Guardian newspaper, UK paper, that polled Americans and asked them things about, about the economy. And I thought that the answers were kind of stunning. So just to run down some of the numbers, 56% believe the U.S. economy is in recession right now. 49%, almost half of them, believe the S&P 500 is down for the year. And 49% believe that the unemployment rate is near a 50-year high. And 72% think inflation is still increasing. So, yeah, all of those things are wrong. Now, the last one is maybe interesting, but the first one, let's just talk about the first one, since that was the question. Are we in recession? Well, the short answer is probably not. I know that's not satisfying, but I used the example of 2008 when I wrote this week, because that recession was dated from November of 2007 and ended, I believe, in June of 09, I think was the official dating. But the official date for the start was November of 07. And so the interesting thing about that is, if you look at the data and look at what was going on in November of 07, there was no obvious recession in the data. And there was no obvious recession in the markets even. If you go back and look at that time, interest rates, for instance, were essentially unchanged over the previous year, the 10-year Treasury note yield. If you go even all the way to August of 2008, the ISM manufacturing index, which is generally, tends to fall before recession, was at 49.2, which is below 50, which means it's a slight contraction. But the ISM says that recession is a reading under, I think, 43 or something like that. So it wasn't even close. And of course, by October, it was obvious. But my point is that sometimes you don't know that you're in recession. And the way they date these things, if you go back, it's always obvious in retrospect when you look backwards. But looking ahead from here, I can't say for sure. But I think that basically right now, there's nothing in the data or the markets that says we're in recession.
Yeah, obviously that's what the data is like. Well, obviously, if you look at the data, which is what we do, other folks don't have time to do that. But I think what some folks do have time to do is, some of the folks that are more Main Street, maybe lower incomes, more sensitive to inflation, more their budgets rent, more their budgets foodstuffs. I think isn't one thing possibly going on here is that some of the folks that are just feeling this inflation are more likely to feel like they're in recession, and some of the folks that, food, maybe they don't have rent, they may have a fixed mortgage, the inflation just hasn't hit them much, that they're almost living in a different economy that's much better.
Well, I think that's true. That's why I wanted to touch on the last question that I mentioned. 72% think that inflation is still rising. Well, inflation is not still rising, because inflation is a rate, and it peaked at 9%, over a year ago, and now it's three and change. So the rate of change has slowed, but prices are still going up. Now, we have seen wages have gone up more than prices have. So essentially people are somewhat better off, but they still get that shock when they go to the grocery store or go to buy, fill up the car, where they see prices that are obviously higher than they were. And they think, well, inflation's still going up. No, prices are still going up. The inflation is a rate. It's not still going up. But I think you're right. I think there are a lot of people for which this economy is not that great. They don't own stocks, so they haven't benefited from the markets. They don't own a house, so they haven't benefited from house prices going up. And they didn't have a mortgage at 2.5% or something like that. And now they want to buy a house, they can't do it because prices have gone up and rates have gone up. So I think, yeah, for a lot of people, there are some issues with the economy. My quibble is with the 49%. You're talking about half the people. No, actually 56% think we're in recession right now. That's a big number. And it's also why it concerns me, because this poll, look, if 56% of people really do think we're in recession, they're not doing well. And I emphasize this all the time. Look, markets and economies are people, and they function because of what people do. And people do the things they do because of the things they think. And if they think we're in recession, they're going to act like we're in recession. And that means they're going to save more, spend less. They're going to do less economic activity. And so, yeah, it concerns me when I see polls like this, because I don't know what the real story is. Look, there's obviously some portion of this is political. If you look at the poll further, the vast majority of people think that, or not vast majority, I think it's in the 60s percent range, believe that this is Biden's fault. Well, you know, I don't like to get into politics because there's really no upside to us doing so, because there's going to be people that like both sides, and I don't see any reason to really take a side. And I don't like either side, so it doesn't matter to me. I would just say that you know, blaming anything on the president, no matter who it is or what party he's from, is kind of ridiculous, because they don't have a lot of control over things. People think they have a lot more control than they do. And I would use the example right now. Look, and I use this in the weekly newsletter. Look, Donald Trump cut taxes during his term, business taxes primarily, but it affected especially small business. I think it was a very positive effect, because, you know, look, I have LLCs and I have S corps. It definitely had an impact on me. And so those things haven't been repealed. Joe Biden didn't have the votes in Congress to change it. And so we're still being affected by those things. And it's true of anything else that happens in government. These programs last for years. Some of the things, the spending programs that were enacted during Trump's administration, are still going on today. And some of the things that Joe Biden has enacted will be going on with the next administration. So blaming anything on one person, I think, is kind of ridiculous. But so there is a political element here. I just think that most people should, you know, when we think about our investments, you need to leave the politics at home, because it just doesn't, it's not going to help you. You know, it's not going to help you perform better, put it that way. So look, I think there are people in this country, obviously there always are people that are struggling, and we, you know, empathize with those people. We want them to do better. We want everybody to do better. We're Americans. We want all Americans to do better. But it's always going to be the case that somebody's struggling. So the question is, how big is that cohort? How big are they? How many people is it? I hope it's not 56%, because if it is, we're probably headed for recession pretty soon.
If you have a question for Joe, put it in the comments section down below.